there, it's me, Nate, and today I want to give you guys my thoughts on The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. So this was released in 2019, and it is the first book in the Roots of Chaos series. And there's 3 of those books so far, and this is the first one in terms of publication order. The other 2 books are both prequels, and this book is it's like, it tells one, it's a huge chonker, and it tells its own complete standalone story. Like, it sets up the world and, has this whole complete arc. So you can just treat this like a standalone book if you want to. You don't even have to read the other 2 books. In terms of, if you, in terms of going on, I've only read this one so far. One of the prequels takes place like a couple years before this, and one of the other prequels takes place several centuries before. So, as far as I know, the author, she stated that she may do a direct sequel to Priory of the Orange Tree at some point, but at the moment she's just done a couple of prequels. So I know some people are always looking for standalone kind of like fantasy stories or standalone books just in general. They don't want to get involved in a series of like 14 books like The Wheel of Time or something like that. In which case, The Priory of the Orange Tree might be a good place for those type of people to pick up something. But anyway, so as for what the book is, I would say it's like a fantasy romance book, and I would not call this romantasy, because oftentimes I feel in romantasy books, it is a romantic novel with fantasy elements. This is a fantasy book with romance in it. That's how I describe it. Some people may not see the distinction there, but to me, I think it makes sense. And as for what the book is about, I mentioned this. I talked about this a little bit before in my video last week. Like what I'm reading, but obviously, people watching this may not have watched that. So, this world, which I don't think, I may have forgotten, but I don't think they ever say the name of the world. I don't know if the world has like some distinct name, but 1,000 years ago, this giant fire-breathing dragon called the Nameless One kind of came out of like the core of the planet and created this like draconic army of like wyverns and like like these like lieutenant dragons, and basically set about like trying to like conquer and like destroy humanity before eventually the Nameless One was sealed away, and has been went back to the core of the planet, has been like slumbering there for the last 1,000 years. And so like now we're in like the present time, and the like wyverns, the worms, and like and like these like lieutenant dragons are starting to awaken and are starting to threaten the world again. And people are fearing that the Nameless One might be returning, and that sets like the basic backdrop for what's happening in the book. And this story takes place across multiple continents. Excuse me. There is, like the world is basically separated between the West and the East, like, and the West has like, some islands and like one big continent, and the East has like one big continent and like some other islands and stuff. And the 2 cultures are very distinct. For the most part, the West follows the religion of Virtudom, which follows the saint who they believe was the one that defeated the Nameless One, like who drove him back. And they treat other religions as like heretics. And the South, they have like a couple different religions, and then the East, they worship dragons, but not the same fire-breathing dragons that serve the Nameless One. Theirs are basically like water dragons, and they basically like worship them as gods in the East. And so the East and West have like this basically like religious divide between them, and they've been separated for centuries. And also like in the East, they have a sea ban where basically if an outsider from the West, comes to like and lands like on one like on the eastern island or the eastern continent, they're for the most part they're just like taken and then killed on sight. So there's a huge religious and societal divide between the two halves of the world. That's been going on for centuries, and so that's a basic setting and backdrop for the story, and that sets up basically the stage for our protagonists. Now in this book there's 4 POV characters. There is Eid Durian, who is so she serves in the Innish court. Innis is like basically like the main country in the West and the virtudom and like the saint kind of religion, because that's where the saint's bloodline is from, following the queendom of the Bear of Nets. And Eid, she serves as kind of like a lady in waiting, or like a maid in the court of Queen Sabran Bear of Net, the latest Baroneth queen. But she is there undercover. She is secretly an agent of the Priory, who is sent to the Innish court to basically watch over and protect the queen. And obviously, well, not obviously, I believe that this is probably the author's favorite character of the book. She easily, I think, has the most page time, the most screen time of the book. Even though there's 4 protagonists, but I would say over half of them are from her perspective. Like she is the main driver of the plot and of anything like super substantial happening in the story. And that is to like the detriment of the other characters of the story, but I'll get there. She's also the only one that has like a romance plotline. Not saying that all of the characters need to have a romance plotline, but she is the only one that does. And she gets like the most character work and like most not really development, because it's not like a coming of age story for her where she's like a completely different person by the end than she is from the start. But she does have some changes, and whether it's like her her with her romantic relationships, or just like her other character relationships, or the things that she believes, and I really loved her. Like me personally, she was my favorite character of the story. Definitely, like when we were doing one of her chapters, I was the most engaged reading this. Then we have Artaloth Beck, or just Loth as he goes by, and he is the heir to one of the western houses in Innis that serves under Queen Barefnet, and he's been childhood friends with the queen, but because of their closeness and the wishes of the people in the Innish court, to marry off to the queen to a foreigner to bring more authority to Innis. He's basically like disappeared in the middle of the night by the spy master of the Innish court, and sent off to serve as the ambassador to Iskalin, which was a longtime ally of Innis, but is now basically turned their backs on the religion of Virginum, and is now worshipping the Nameless One and his draconic army, and has been taken over by the draconic army. So he has been sent there to be an ambassador. So it's basically a death sentence for him. And that's kind of like where his story starts off as. And so I don't know really how else to word this, but I think it's a good way of putting it. He kind of serves in the story as like the culture shock character, and by that I mean is like whether he is in Iskalin or some of the other locations he goes to, and he sees like their different ways of life from Innis, and the different their cultures and their religion, and how it's kind of like it shakes like his faith. It shakes like what he believes, you know, and he kind of like, you know, develops over the story. That happens to him basically, you know, throughout. He is like constantly being challenged on like, what he knows and believes. Excuse me. And I think, you know, that's like basically his purpose that he serves in the story. He does, you know, he does have his moments, but like even though he is one of the four main POVs, unlike Eid, he feels like more of like a supporting POV. And then we have Tane. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name or honestly a lot of these names right. I don't listen to audiobooks, so I'm just going off of what I'm reading by sight. But Tane, she is from the island of Seiki in the east, and she dreams of joining the High Sea Guard and becoming a dragon rider. Because, like I was saying earlier, in the east they worship dragons as gods, but like every 50 years or so, the members of the High Sea Guard of that generation will get the opportunity to become dragon riders. And it's, you know, her generation of High Sea Guard is next up to be the new dragon riding generation. And so the night before her trials are supposed to begin, she sneaks out of seclusion, because there's like a, you know, like an old story that if you sneak out the day before and go to like the shore of the island, you can it's supposed to bring you good luck for the trials. But when she's there, she encounters an outsider, a Westerner on Seiki, and as I mentioned before, they have this sea ban. And if she, you know, she's concerned that if she reports to the authorities, the outsider, that the trials will be canceled, and she'll, like, you know, miss out on her opportunity and her dream. So basically, she, with the help of her friend, takes this outsider and kind of like forces him upon one of the few outsiders that are allowed on Seiki, on this port, you know, village called Orisama. And in there's a surgeon, you know, surgeon, scholar, alchemist named Niklay Ruse, and she basically forces this outsider upon Niklay's, you know, for the promise of, you know, paying him money if he hides him temporarily. And we'll get to Niklay's in a second, because he's our fourth POV character. But Tane, you know, she has like that kind of like looming over her while she, you know, goes through with her trials to try to join the Sea Guard. And obviously I'm not going to spoil anything. These are all like stuff that's like super early on in the book. That, you know, that's like a huge part of like what's going on with Tane and her storyline. But as for the character herself, I really dislike this character. She's like probably my least favorite character of the story. She's really unlikable. She's really selfish and arrogant, and even though, like, you know, it talks about she like came up from nothing. She was like this little orphan girl that was poor before she was like taken in to learn to train to be a potential Sea Guard, you know, member. She as soon as she gets even slightly elevated, she treats people, you know, lower than her and like looks down on them. And then as the story progresses, Samantha Shannon tries to tell the story with Tane about how she should like forgive herself, and like, you know, kind of like redemption. But it was bad. It was bad. Like it didn't feel earned. And I never believed it. I never felt it from her character. You know, the justification for any of her actions. Yeah, it just fell flat for me. You know, I can't really go into more detail about it without spoiling things. And then we have Niklay Ruse, who, as I mentioned, is this like scholar alchemist from the kingdom of Mintenden, also in the west, that was banished to Seiki in the east because he tried to deceive Queen Barafnet and Innis years ago, and so ever since then he's been banished to basically the other side of the world. And after, like, his, with his life is basically just like crumbling around him, because even before he tried to deceive the queen, he was like losing his grasp on things because he fell into like a deep depression and grief after the loss of the love of his the loss of the love of his wife, of the love of his life. I can't talk. Sorry. And so he just becomes like an alcoholic. He becomes like a gambler. And he has all these debts and stuff. And that's part of the reason why he takes in the outsider from Tane, in the promise of getting money, because he needs to pay off his gambling debts. And that's kind of how his story starts. And outside of like the early, maybe like early 25% of the book, after that he serves no real purpose to the story. Like, nothing that he does after that has any matter, like it doesn't have any real consequence. But the author keeps having in there his chapters scattered around here and there, and it all kind of just feels like page filler, because nothing that he does by the end of the book has any real consequence. It just felt like a real waste of time, which is a shame, because I think it could have been used for because I honestly think that you could have, after the first like 25% of the book, you could kind of just like write him out, like his he didn't need to be a character that stuck around for the entire book, and then that you could have used that page time to flesh out Tane or Loth more, so that way they could at least try to be at least on the closer towards the same level of time and attention that Eid gets in the book. All right, so but yeah, that's like the world, the setting, the characters. So I want to kind of go into like my pros and cons before we start wrapping this up. So at least for my pros, sorry. So I really loved the world building of this novel. I think like the cultures, the scenery that Samantha Shannon describes, the politics, like the political intrigues in courts that she writes about. I think they were all like really engaging. I found them all really interesting. I wanted more, to be honest. Like, this is already in 804 pages, I think my edition is, this hardback, and I honestly, by the end of it, I was like, man, I wish there was a little bit more, which sounds crazy, but that I think it's a good sign, obviously. Let's see what else we got. And I really love Eid and her interactions with the Queen Sabrin Baronef, the Queen of Enos. I think they're like the two best characters in the book. And whenever Eid or the Queen has like story moments, those are like the most engaged I was in the book. The most like the highest peaks of the story. And as far as like the romance in this book, I think it's pretty good. It's there is like there's like spiciness, for people who like, for romantasy fans, there is like some spiciness. There is like a couple of like sex scenes and stuff like that. But I think it's really tastefully done. It doesn't devolve into like smut. But I think it's like really tastefully done. It's kept pretty short. But like the relationship of the romance, I could find it believable, like how it happened, and like the two characters. I really enjoyed that. And as for like my cons of this, so like I mentioned before, I think Tane and Niclay Ruse, I think those two characters felt like really underdeveloped and like half-baked, which is like a real detriment. Like, it really sucks, because I mean, out of the four main characters of this book, like half of them I think are pretty weak. And outside of just characters, I think the final like 100-ish pages of this book, like the entire like final battle with like the Draconic army and like the conclusion and like wrapping up of like the characters like journeys, like arcs, you know, is like all kind of like wrapped up and crammed into like the last 100 pages of the book. Which it felt like nowhere near enough time. Consider like, so basically it's let's see, how do they describe this, the stages of a story? Like rising, action, something, and then climax. It's like the climax is like the last like brief snippet of the book, and so it feels really rushed and unsatisfying after hundreds of pages of buildup. Because I wrote in my notes that, like, to me, it felt like this novel was supposed to be originally 2 books, but they decided, for whatever reason, Samantha Shannon or her editors or publishers, whatever, it felt like they had, like, she had 2 novels, and they decided to cram them together in one and cut out most of the content from that second one. And I think it does a disservice because there's a lot of like setup and world building and some interesting character work in here that I feel like is brought down by how unsatisfying the ending is. So wrapping this up, as you can tell, kind of like, you know, from what I was just saying, this book was a bit of a roller coaster for me. Like I started out you know, liking it, like built like a slow build up. Then I was like really loving it. Then I was like getting bored, and then it went up a bit, and then kind of plateaued towards the finish. Because what was I gonna say? But like despite that, and like its other flaws, I enjoy like the parts that were good. You know, stand out to me more than like the negatives. Like I really enjoyed my time with this. Like it's 800 pages, it's a long book, and like the bad parts, you know, did like, you know, bring it down for me. But overall, I still really like this book. I don't think it's great. I think it's a good book. And for me, a good book on my scale is 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like I mentioned before, this is you could read this book as a standalone, or if you're not really like familiar with like a lot of like, you know, epic fantasy or stuff like that, I think you could like recommend this to somebody, and they could have a good time, because the beginning of the book is they throw a lot of like proper nouns at you, like the names of countries and places and positions that you're not gonna understand. But after like the first 100 pages or so, it kind of like you like lock in the language and kind of like what, you know, like you like when they say this or, you know, this country or that country, like you understand it. And after the first 100 pages, the book goes really smoothly. Because I started this book last week and I finished it yesterday, so it went really quick for me. I thought it was going to take me a lot longer, but like after you get past that first, you know, beginning portion of the book, it goes really smoothly. So I think this could be like a good entry to fantasy book, despite how long and, you know, it is. And I think you could have a good time with it. So yeah, I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. A good book. And I do want to read at some point the other 2 books here in her in Samantha Shannon's Roots of Chaos series. They're both prequels, like I mentioned. And then she has another book series called The Bone Season. I think that's supposed to be more sci-fi, like a more like kind of like YA-ish dystopian sci-fi type of thing. And it sounded interesting, so I want to try that out at some point too. But yeah, I hope this didn't go on too long, but I'd like to thank you guys for watching the video. And if you could, you know, just subscribe and then like the video and comment down below and let me know what you guys think of the book, if you've read it before or if you'd be interested in trying it. And until next time, thank you for watching.